Well, we're still taking a second to get things set up here. A little bit of email PowerPoint difficulty, but that's nothing new. But I don't really need the PowerPoint to start the presentation because actually I wanted to start that presentation by recognizing, thank you, where we are now in time. This is, oh, curly hair. I'm just gonna, is this all right? Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Okay. Sure. All right. Yeah, okay. So this is my presentation on Umwelt Nihilation, but as I was saying, uh, we've been in a white cubicle for a week. So I actually wanted to start this presentation by taking a deep cleansing breath. So with me, hold and just release. Feels a lot better. Now, of course, the context that we find ourselves in now is at the end of the 2025 gatherings in Biosemiotics, Rotterdam. And so I think it would be remiss of us to ignore that context and not say thank you to our hosts and give them a little bit of a round of applause, bid a warm adieu to this year's gatherings in Biosemiotics. And I'd like to reflect a little bit on some of the themes that we've gotten to talk about. Is everything good here? Yeah. Okay. Okay. It is a gift to be able to come together with similarly minded people and talk about concepts like biosemiotic harmonies. Would a mouse be better? Okay. Good. Yes. Like biosemiotic harmonies, or come together to take seriously the question and profundity of a phenomenon such as resonance. And we get to hear people such as Kelly Cool say in such a quotable semiotician, the highest purpose of science, to care for life. Quote from the first day that I very much liked. But there's another quote that I'm going to pull from a less quoted biosemiotician, if I can call you that, that came up during my friend Julio's presentation yesterday, which is, to be a healer, one must be in the disease, which leads me to the core point of my topic, Umwelt Nihilation, which runs a little bit counter to the current that we like to move in biosemiotics. So I'd like to make this transition to this topic a little bit less shocking and smoother by going through a story. Now, to me, to use a religious metaphor, biosemiotics represents a sort of awareness of a Garden of Eden way of being, a presence and ecological simultaneity. And well, I'd like to use this story to get our foot into how this sense might still relate to something as terrible as nothingness. And this story comes from one of my favorite authors series, The Wizard of Earthsea, The Farthest Shore, in which the Wizard of Earthsea, whom you may call Sparrowhawk, is sensitive to and trying to mend an imbalance that has come about in the world. And in his searching for the resolution, he is turned aside on the seas by a dark storm and finds himself floating, being taken care of by a people who live on rafts. And as he spends time there, a time comes for them to participate in a sort of balancing ritual of the sense, which they call the long dance, where the whole raft dances through the night on the raft, seeking balance on this watery world. But as they do so, the sign of ending comes upon them. And I'd like to read that scene. Then, looking southward, he saw high up yellow Gobarden, and below it the 8 companions even to the last, the rune of ending, clear and fiery above the sea. And turning to Sparrowhawk, he saw the dark face turned to those same stars. Why do you cease? The chief was asking the singer. It's not daybreak, not even dawn. The man stammered and said, I do not know. Sing on. The long dance is not ended. I do not know the words, the chanter said, and his voice rose high as if in terror. I cannot sing. I have forgotten the song. So that leads us to the actual topic of the presentation, Umwelt Nihilation. And actually, this it doesn't have so much of a conceptual basis. It's more of a philosophical tangent that I've ended up on as a result of some empirical research. Now, that research began in a lovely place, Utsjoki, Finnmark. Some of you may know it, but if you don't, I don't blame you because it's right up in this threshold between Norway and Finland, real high up north. And I was working with a salmon, a species named Oncorhynchus gorbusha, or the pink salmon. Now, since we're limited on time, I wanted to be able to give everyone the most impressionistic, physicalistic, reductive, commodified version of the pink salmon possible. So I went out into the wild and found one on Tinder. And this is its bio. It's the most recently evolved of all salmonid. It's native to the Pacific. It has a strict 2-year life cycle and a streamlined morphology. Now, this is relevant to know because most salmonids actually have complex, diverse ecophysiologies which develop in complex co-creation with their environment. The Atlantic salmon, a researcher recently was able to show, have 117 different categorizable life history strategies. The pink salmon has one, right? On top of that, they have a powerful cardiovascular system, an extreme tolerance for salinity and temperature, and they can even lay eggs in brackish water. Only pink salmon can do that. So you can generally say they're a generalist. Now, in the 1960s through the 1980s, the Soviets took interest in this generalism and regularity of life history strategy so that they could start stocking food into the White Sea and reaping some harvests. And in the history of the pink salmon in this area, you can see right when the stocking programs end, right before 1980, and a population establishes in the region. There's a small reproducing population that appears here and there. And they kind of stagnate for a little while, and from 2008 onwards, they more or less disappear off the map. You don't really hear from them until 2017. And they go shooting up, a massive explosion in population numbers and distribution. And since 2017, between 2017 and 2013, this number has grown 32 times overall. An enormous, well, you see the numbers. So the question is why? And to introduce my thesis, it's worth knowing, first of all, that all salmon are highly interspecifically competitive. And in reviews of this phenomenon of what determines pink salmon population density and health and whatnot, you find that the primary determinant of juvenile survival is population density. So population density is a strong determinant of population overall. Now, what was the constraint stopping that White Sea population of pink salmon from undergoing this explosion that it has since undergone? I say it's their homing agency. It's the relationship that the pink salmon had to their natal environment, their impulse to return home. And it was because of that loss, the loss of their ability to home, that they had this shift in population size, numbers, distribution. That's why I call this the Umwelt degeneracy hypothesis. Now, last year I presented some of the scientific, quick visualization of what I'm talking about. If you have the White Sea population here, going out, feeding in the Atlantic Ocean, and then returning with high fidelity to that White Sea, if you were to weaken that return and have some, even a small population, it could be a very small population, go off and accidentally spawn in some other river system, then it wouldn't be long until you have a generalized wandering phenotype that disperses across the Atlantic. And you can see that reports of where pink salmon appeared when this seems to be the case. Up till 2012, virtually none of them, just the occasional lost, very confused pink salmon showing up in Norway. But in 2015, there was 25, 50, 50, 70. There was some clusters of pink salmon appearing in the north. And then bang, 2017, you get the picture. They're distributed across the entirety of the Atlantic Ocean now. You can't see North America, but it seems that they're going there as well. There's not really signs that they're slowing down. This is only going to be a bigger and bigger thing, probably. Uh, Now, if you're interested in the whole scientific, empirical aspects of this, I have a paper coming out titled Umwelt Degeneracy is the Primary Cause of Rapid Expansion of Pink Salmon in the North Atlantic Waters. Bit of a mouthful, but we're not going to talk about that because it's, big and dense, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit after but we're here more for the philosophical side of it, and that is using pink salmon as an index of Umwelt nihilation. Um, Now, again, Calabi shows up as a quote. Of course, life is in relation. So, um, yes. So, since we're going to talk about this loss of relation, it's necessary to establish in the first place what that relation originally was. Looks like the video doesn't want to play, but pity. Well, just imagine, Canadian streams. Actually, okay. I can actually, yeah. If this doesn't work, then I've also got a YouTube link, and it might be better if I just talked over that to give the cinematic sense of the species and their relationship to the land. Okay, well, if we go past all of this stuff, just in case. Oh, yes. Go back to the justification. Yes. Uh, we might have to escape and then. Okay. While the technicians are on it, I'll start telling the story. Um, this is partly because of their physiology, their life habit, their relationship to the land. Virtually every place that you find pink salmon homing, you find some variation on the theme of the salmon being a sort of vital current of the cosmos, the lifeblood of the land, something that regularly returns and nourishes the people. And the Sami people, who are the people I was working with up in Finnmark, of course, they have a position that is very familiar to us by now as biosemioticians. That yes, uh, that the pink salmon are not just food; they're not just objects for consumption. Uh, they're more than that. They're the land, their place, their language, even they say, their community. But I think it's worth talking about the traditions of the West Coast Salish people who view the salmon as people who live in the sea, uh, viewed as sort of a higher. May we play? Mute and play, maybe? Could we mute it or turn it down? Yeah, or mute it. Yeah. That the salmon are people living in the ocean who willingly give themselves up for the higher nourishment of the wider land. Um, and they make these masks, salmon masks, which are kind of half person, half salmon. And they tell stories of how the salmon people put on these masks to play this silly prank on us, which is bringing us life and vitality from the ocean to feed us. And yeah, that they're these higher creatures that feed the whole. Now, what science knows about the effects of salmon on the ecosystems kind of mirror this fact. Um, Anywhere between 24 to 65% of the nitrogen found in riparian plant communities inland derives from oceanic carbon with which the salmon bring in. You wouldn't have redwood forests or the majestic Canadian rainforest. You wouldn't have the substance of those forests if it weren't for the circulation of the salmon. And that's really what it is. It's a larger scale pulse of a creature that brings in. It's a circulation not that different to our own hearts. Maybe that's why the Salish saw them as a higher species. Maybe not. In any case, moving on with the theory. Thank you. this might remind us of Uexküll's compositional theory of nature. That, yes, please. Uexküll's compositional theory of nature, which essentially goes that nature itself is to be viewed like a symphony. For every form or entity, existence, whatever you want to call it, that indicates a point, there's a counterpoint. Things are complementary, they match, they resonate, they form these natural harmonies together. And so if we want to, of course, it's pretty easy to see intuitively when we let ourselves see this harmony of movements in nature. But if we want to kind of translate this process into a worldview, you might say that the organism interprets and acts with its Umwelt, and this activity complements and resonates with other related agents. And the result of this is that as a whole, natural harmony self-produces. Now, I think it's worth pointing out some analogies to other similar theories, such as, such as the Gaia hypothesis. If the compositional theory of nature, if this argument runs from the particular to the whole, then the argument of the Gaia hypothesis is very similar, except a bit more of a whole to the particular, which is the living world is a self-regulating whole, yeah, which seeks energetic balance and relaxed states, and therefore achieves this through a sort of overall harmonization of particular agencies. We can also say Umwelt. This is a concept that's recently been introduced into discourse, but we're not going to dive into that quite so much. Now, what I would like to posit in regards to these harmonizing theories is what I call the harmony null hypothesis, which is essentially that when you are beholding nature or seeking to understand it or intentionally integrate with it, say, it is generally a good place to start to assume that any one thing is already harmonized with unseen and unknown others in a manner which minimizes contradictions. Okay. And I think this stance of the harmony null hypothesis is something like what we're standing on when we, in biosemiotics, produce this Edenic logic with emphasis on presence and vitality and continuity and complexity. But of course, we're talking about Umwelt nihilation. So if we're stepping away from the present, the imminent moment, if we add just a grain of time, we might ask ourselves, is this sort of thinking compatible with evolutionary theory? Now, a lot of our gut wrench reactions, knee jerks, at this point in history might be that no, because it's evolutionary theory posits a sort of conflict. But if you look at new evolutionary systems theories, you can say yes. There's an idea that's recently come up from the Department of Theoretical Biology, Charles University Prague, which I'm happy to be a part of, called stability-based sorting. At least I believe it originates there. Don't quote me on that. And essentially, it's doing what systems theory does best, which is taking a general, very, very large truth and then saying it very simply, which is that that which persists in time is that which is stable, which is another way of saying maybe harmonized. So the continuity of naturally selected phenomena is due to this capacity that life has for cooperation or resonance within larger wholes. Yeah. So bringing this into the context of the Darwinian evolutionary imaginary, I want to level this line of thought against the idea of fitness. Because how can we think of fitness really as anything except fittedness? Now, Darwinian and especially neo-Darwinian imaginations of the evolutionary process far too much privilege the aspect of intraspecific competition or selfish individualism. Now, I think historically what this is the co-option of a natural evolutionary process by the imperial, colonial, patriarchal imaginary. And I think that this is why the result of a lot of the evolutionary thought that we have today is the projection that the entailments resemble the summits of Western civilized hierarchies, where the conclusion of evolution appears like some kind of transcendental hero. Some great examples of this fittedness, which really have nothing to do with competition, might be my favorite plant, the white mountain aven, which follows the sun in a heliotropism with reflective white petals to warm their ovaries and therefore settle frigid mountain environs. There's also this guy who looks a little bit scary and spiny, the horned devil. Don't step on him. But ecologists think that as defensive as these thorns might seem, they are primarily for the collection of moisture in the dry environs. Of course it is. When you're living in a desert, moisture is the problem. Before predators, I'd say. So if we keep in mind a sort of continuity of evolution, of vital process and development, the formation of higher order resonances maybe, we can get a sort of gradualist theory of evolution, but we also know that evolution is itself nonlinear. Stephen Jay Gould's argument of punctuated equilibrium, of course, indicates this, and he metaphorically represents it as a ratchet, but you can just as well see it in ammonite shells or tree rings, a beating pulse, a cycle. And if you want to translate this into a philosophical, soulful cosmology, then you might get something like the Platonic theory of emanation. The first and then the second, and then the first and then the second, and the first and the second, and the collapse. And of course, this idea has been with us in our Western imaginaries for some time. A great abstract representation of this that isn't psychedelic AI drawn is František Kupka, a Czech abstract painter's The Discs of Newton, a sort of concentric unfolding of sensuous being, I suppose. But from a more socio-critical perspective, you also have Jean Deville's Exemption, which is the lunging of this red-caped hero into the emanations from the singular light source. Now, to shout out again, the Charles University Philosophy and History of Science Department this time, they've made me aware of a very interesting fact in the history of Western philosophical cosmologies. So Plato has this sort of geometrical, mathematical, model the heavenly bodies, follow the circular resonances, model of the cosmic soul. But this self-emanating cosmos was actually very much influenced by an earlier pre-Socratic philosopher who was named Empedocles. And this is important because Empedocles' spheros, this self-pulsating organism, was not directly geometrical in nature, but thought of first as a zoogonic, embryonic analogy. And a lot of people know Empedocles for his introduction of the Eastern four elements, air, water, earth, fire, to Western philosophy. So substantially, this cosmos is composed of these four elements, but ultimately, they are ruled by forces of love and strife. Love operates, according to Empedocles, by bringing these elements together, fire and water, or air and earth, bringing complexity and interrelation, while strife separates and matches like to like. So you can see here there's a GIF of a jellyfish being born. Yeah. So for Empedocles, the living cosmos follows a pattern of expansion and contraction, or fusing and separating through time in the same way that an embryo does. So love is the harmony, and strife is the ancestor of nihilation. So if we want, this is sort of back to my work specifically, if we want a relation-oriented theory of invasive species or non-relation, such as we see in the pink salmon, then what you find is that, most simply, species that do not relate and therefore proliferate are the invasive species. So you can see this, of course, in the pink salmon example. When they lose the homing ability, they become invasive and they disperse across space. Yeah, but there's also, it's not enough to say just non-relation. 3, okay. It's also good to look at the particular forms of these non-relations and how particular scientific empirical phenomena indicate this more overall cosmological thought. And the most obvious form is weapons. One of the most successful theories in invasive species ecology is that the species which have weapons are the ones that are successful colonizers. Especially poison is a very common one. And if you look at how a weapon facilitates relation, it is a mechanism of reduction of relation in that it negates the presence of the other. You can see this in cane toads. They have these, I don't know what they're called exactly, but they contain poison in them. And when they're squeezed or bitten or anything, they exude it, and whoever's biting or touching them gets exposed to it. Now, for humans, you step on a cane toad, get some of that in your eye, you're going to go blind for about a week and feel like someone hit you with a baseball bat. But for smaller creatures like foxes and snakes, they can't handle it. They die immediately. And so one of the real crises of the cane toad is that they actually prevent the organic learning of the colonized group. There's no chance to say, okay, it tastes bad, I'm not going to eat it anymore. You die right away. So non-relation, you can see analogies between, well, we'll get to that. And we were talking a little bit about plant invasive ecologies as well. It's good to know the Japanese knotweed, which engages in something called allelopathy, which is the releasing of chemical compounds into the soil that inhibit the growth of other plant species. This is part of how it becomes an invasive species, by negating the relation that it has to its other. But it's also worth talking about stress, because it's an interesting concept in this context. The original Latin term stress comes from strictus, or drawn tight. If we translate that into the Gaia systems theory of trying to seek rest, of course, this stress kind of contradicts that. But there's been some time since what John Deely called the Latin Age, and now scientists have since tried to fit it into the Darwinian adaptionist paradigm. How do we do this? By calling it general adaptation syndrome, or a non-specificity of relation. Of course, the simple are receding from us. I'm gonna speed ahead here, because if I may.
Yeah, go for it. Going. Machine. Okay. Which index? Yeah, so okay, ecological capacity is in there. I want to talk about the way I conceptualize this symptom.
Yeah,
if you think, including questions.
I mean, you're at like time. You're at time, but 1 minute and some questions. It's reasonable.
Okay. So if we think of life in terms of a wave, there's the aspect of the wave that repeats and cycles itself, and there's the aspect of the wave that thrusts forward, which leads us into a sort of analogy, a geometrical analogy of thinking between invasive or non-relating or indigenous or relating species on one another. It's cyclicity, what Goethe would call das Volkslicher, the cyclical, the divine, the eternal, and the linearity, the thing of charges and relies on radius. So translating all this that we've been talking about, you can find again an analogy between the stable, cyclical, the harmonizing, the restful, that which acts in cycles, and strikes, the breakage, the discontent, the restless, that which thrusts the air. Okay, the scene. Can I have just like okay? So if you think of circularity in terms of the mythical symbol of the Ouroboros, the sort of bisection of circularity in linearity gives us the symbol of the slain Ouroboros, which maybe coincidentally produces the letter phi, which again is the phonetic root of fuel, which becomes love. Now in the Renaissance, they actually, mathematicians associated phi with the golden ratio, the mathematical unity of nature. So I would again reintroduce the idea that biosemiotics seeks to understand the balance. Yes. And again from the beginning. Wow. Now we're going to skip over the colonialism part because I think the analogy is clear enough. Let's let it go again. Well, I want to go back to the book of Ursula Le Guin, The Bit of the Sea. This is how Sparrowhawk talks with Aaron, his companion, about the nature of this annihilation. Aaron asks, can it be a kind of pestilence, plague that drifts from land to land, blighting the crops and flocks and men's spirits? Ged says, a pestilence is a motion of the great balance, of the equilibrium itself. This is different. There is a steep stink of evil in it. We may suffer for it when the balance of things rights itself, but we do not lose hope and forego art and forget the words of the making. Nature is not unnatural. This is not a righting of the balance, but an upsetting of it. There is only one creature who can do that. A man, Aaron said, tentative. We men, Sparrowhawk says. How? By an unmeasured desire for life. And that's it. As some of you may know, my teacher is studying a PhD on Thorolf at Charles University Theoretical Biology Department. If you want to contact me, here's my information, and I thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you for that material. That was quite insightful. When you talk about neo-Darwinism,
Yes.
overemphasizing competition, which is right.
Yes.
I was reminded of a friend of mine back in Denmark. He was writing a book about cooperation in evolution. And when he did his literature search for that work, he found that Department.
Yes, the old anarchist, mutual aid, is a bachelor in natural selection.
Yes.
Read for anyone who hasn't passed it.
Yes,
Yes.
I just wanted to bring up the topic and ask if you were there.
Yes, no, I was actually, when I was rehearsing this presentation in my dreams, I imagined someone would bring up the topic. Obviously, I think Kropotkin's critique of the thrust of Darwinism that existed at the early 20th century, this kind of de-imperializing the conception of natural evolution. I think that's great and a step in the right direction. And of course, it belongs to a particular historical context. So much in the same way that Marx kind of envisions the post-revolution dictatorships of the
utilitarian needs. Kropotkin doesn't really do much to reintegrate on. I don't think he does enough to reintegrate. Part of the argument of mutual discussions that we as organisms cooperate to survive the hardships of the world. There's enough hardships in the world as is. That's why we cooperate. That's why we evolve. But I don't know if we as society today were to do the same kind of thing. It might manifest itself as sale. One very short question. Yes. Yes. That's a great question. Simplest answer is I really don't know, but I still like to hazard, part of the right. Um, sorry. Yes. Yes. Please. Examine a great example is actually, but of course they're proliferating, planted, they're dumping so many nutrients in the Arctic. The Arctic, you just can't digest it. The bears are fat, distasteful. And it all goes to algae and microbes and creates rot, stink, and pestilence. It's one of the main things that some people complain about. They say our river smells like a rotting corpse. You don't recognize it. This isn't the same river, it's changed. But the other side of that is, well, there's a lot of fresh money at population of salmon. So if we start farming that and catching them, selling them to the market, hey, we can feed a lot of people. I really don't know which way it's going to shake out. Maybe the whole system. I don't know. Maybe the Arctic's going to have to reinvent itself. Yeah, but these sort of what it's like. It puts us in the imminent next. Thank you. The adjacent possible. Because these are imminent pressing crises that we have to relate to.
Small one. I get to ask the last question, but it's not a
Excellent.
question. It's an assertion, and that is that the epitome of the invasive species is our species, given as a youth. Of being a weed. We're very good at it, and we have to be in the time. But we are an invasive species.
I agree
It's not
completely.
just now.
I agree completely, and let me brief response. I swear. Yes, I believe that we humans have come to be the invasive species. Also, we're responsible for the majority of invasive species that exist today. We're the things mixing things up, transplanting plants. Cool, because I think it looks pretty, so I'm going to put it in my garden and boom. But I also don't want to anthropomorphize necessarily imperialism. It's like Donna Haraway's critique of the Anthropocene. Yes, it's humans doing the thing, but humans don't have to do the thing. It's more of a capitalist scene. Okay.
How long did it take us to get out of Africa?
I don't.
We were on the road from the beginning.
Could be.